Now that we have some test cases in place for the expenses action generators, we're going to write some test cases for the filters action generators. I'm going to kick things off by closing down every single file we have open so far, and I'm also going to take a quick moment to delete the add test file. That was great when we were first exploring Jest, but now we have real-world test files in place, and that no longer serves much of a purpose. So now we're back down to one test suite, one test file, and 4 test cases. If we're going to be creating a test file for filters, filters lives in the source actions folder, which means the test file should live in the tests actions folder. Right here, that would be filters.test.js. Then we're going to go ahead and actually write the test cases. Before we do, let's just crack open the file we're trying to test. As we can see, we have 5 action generators, and we're actually going to be creating 6 test cases. So for this one, we're going to write a test case that uses the default and that provides a value. That's going to be 2 test cases. Then we're going to write just 1 for all of these. Since there are no defaults, we want to test as well. Over here, let's go ahead and start that process. We're going to do a couple of these together as we explore something new, and then I'll set you free to do 4 on your own. So first up, what we're going to do is import, and we're going to start with set start date and set end date. We want to make sure that both of those work correctly. So I will import them, importing set start date and set end date. And I'm going to grab them from the correct location. So we go up 2 folders, out of actions, out of tests. We go into the actions folder in source, and then sitting right there, we should have the filters file. So this is the thing that we are actually trying to test. And what we're going to do, as I mentioned, is create 2 test cases for those 2 action generators. So first up, test should generate set start date action object. Then I can set up my arrow function, toss a semicolon on the end, and I can create the test call for the second one. Should generate set end date action object. I will then set up the arrow function, and there we go. Now we're ready to actually write the test cases. But with these ones, we want to make sure we're passing in the same data we're passing in the real world, and we know that that is a moment instance. So in order to correctly pass in the data, we need to actually import moment. And just like we can import our own files in these test suite files, we can import third-party modules as well. So I can just import moment from moment like I would in any of my other files, and then I can actually use it in the code down below. So let's go ahead and start with this one, the set start date test. Right here, all I'm going to do is create a const, and I'm going to create a const for action, and then I'm going to go ahead and set its value from a call to set start date. And for this one, I am going to set up a moment instance starting at 0, so starting at that January 1st at midnight, 1970, and then we can make an assertion. So I'm going to expect something about the action object. It's an object, and if we're going to compare things, we have to use toEqual and pass the object in. Now the first one is easy, set start date for the type, and then the second one is a little harder, so we want to make sure to check start date. So first up is type. Type equal to set start date, and then the next thing we're going to be looking at is the actual start date value. Now in this case, we want to make sure it is also a moment instance starting at 0. So all we're going to do is create a new instance right here as well. That is going to allow us to correctly make the assertion. Now if we go ahead and save the filters test file, we should see the suite is rerunning, and we can see that everything is passing. The test case we just wrote has no problems. Now we can do the exact same thing down below. Before I set you free, we're going to create a const action. We are going to get its value from set end date, and we are going to pass in what it expects, which is a moment instance. And the reason I am using 0 here as opposed to passing in it with no arguments is that this is going to rely on the time the test runs. So instead of doing that, we're just going to set a fixed time. Then we can make our assertion expecting something about the action object, expecting it to equal another object. Here we have a type value of set end date, and then we also have the end date thing, and end date is supposed to be a moment starting at 0. So now that we have this test case in place, we can save the file. All the test cases are still passing. And now it's time to talk about the other 4 test cases. So we're going to be creating one for each of these, really easy. And then we're going to be creating 2 for this. One that passes in a value and makes sure that gets set, and one that relies on the default empty string, which allows us to clear the text filter. Knocking out all 4 of those is going to be your challenge for the video. So what I'd like you to do is add those 4 test calls down below. You are going to need to import and set up the test cases. And remember, you should be creating 4 total, 2 for set text filter and 1 for each of the sort by. Now it's your time, so take a moment to pause the video, add those 4 test cases, make sure you see 10 passing tests. Then you can go ahead and click play. Take a moment to pause the video. All right, how'd that one go? I'm going to kick things off by writing a couple of test cases for set text filter. Step 1 is to actually import it, set text filter. And if your import lines do get really long, you can just break them up like this, moving each of your named exports onto its own line. This is perfectly valid, and you'll see the syntax quite a bit. Now we're going to add the actual test calls. So for the first one, we can make sure that we generate the correct action object when we do pass text in. Should generate set text filter object with text value. So we are going to pass a value in and make sure that it does get set. Now it's okay if the actual details of each test case were different. Me and you, we're all going to have different text names, and we're probably going to have different variable names and different structures down below. So right here, I will create a const called action to get that action back, and I will call the thing we just imported set text filter. The whole point of this one is to pass something in, so let me pass something in. Let's go ahead and use the literal string something in. So we have this data getting passed in to the action generator, which means we are getting our action object back. And now we can make an assertion expecting action to equal something. To equal right here, we need the type. The type for this one is set text filter. And we also need text. The text value for this one would be something in. Now, once again, it's probably a good idea to pull this out into a variable that we reference in both places to prevent any typos inside of the test case. So I could create const text, setting it equal to some value. Then I can reference that in both locations. So right here, I can reference text, and right here I can set it using the ES6 shorthand. So now that we have this test case in place, we can go ahead and actually run the program and make sure it is working as expected. We can see we now have 7 passing tests, so we can move on to the other test case for that same action generator. Should generate set text filter object with default. We're going to go ahead and set up the arrow function for this one. And inside of here, we're going to go ahead and call set text filter with no arguments. So const action equals a call to set text filter. There's no need to create a text variable because we're not going to pass any data in. Then we just make an assertion about what we got back, expecting the action to equal. And right here, that'll be an object with a type value of set text filter, which we already did up above, and a text value equal to an empty string, which should be the default value. Now we can go ahead and save this one. It is indeed passing. There are just 2 more left. We're going to make one for sort by date and one for sort by amount. Right here, test should generate action object for sort by date. Then I can actually just take this test case, duplicate it, and change a couple of words. So I'm going to copy the entire call, paste it down below, and change it to should generate action object for sort by amount. Now right here, we can go ahead and call the things, but we do have to import them. So up above, we don't have those things. Sort by amount is the first one, and sort by date would be the second one, and now we're going to need to use them. Right here, I'm going to expect whatever I get back from sort by date to equal something. And I'm just showing you a different way you could structure your tests. So I don't need to create a separate variable. I could just toss it all in line like this, to equal an object with the type of sort by date. And this is going to get the job done. Everything is nice and concise. And we can actually go ahead and save this. And over here, we can see we now have 10 passing test cases. We went from 8 to 10 because we do have this guy. And since it has no code, it is considered a passing test because no error is ever thrown. But now we are going to go ahead and add some code in. So we're going to expect sort by amount to have a return value of something using toEqual an object where type equals sort by amount. Perfect. So there we have it. We have our final test case. I'm going to save the file, and it is indeed still passing. Now, the great thing about having this test case in place is that should we want to refactor any of our code or should anything break, we're going to be notified of that. Now, in this case, I totally understand that testing still seems pretty contrived. It seems like we're testing things that have a very, very small chance of ever breaking. I mean, come on, this is 3 lines of code and we just return an object. And I understand that. These definitely are test cases that are a little more on the iffy side. Should I even create them? But what we're going to start looking at from here on out is how we can test more complex things. Things that are definitely going to be refactored or changed and stand a real chance of causing problems. So the goal in the next one is to write some test cases for this guy. This is our expenses selector, and it does a whole lot. And if we wanted to go in here and refactor something, we might be unsure that it's going to work correctly for all of those different edge cases. So the goal is to be able to make sure this does work. We're going to focus on doing that in the next video, so stay tuned, and I'll see you then.